Introduction. The air inside the brownstone on 72nd Street smelled of heavy incense, old paper, and a strange kind of certainty. Outside, New York City was shivering through the winter of 1933. The Great Depression had turned the streets gray. People stood in long lines for bread, their coats thin and their pockets empty. But inside this room, the cold didn't seem to matter. Neville Goddard sat across from a man named Abdullah. Neville was a young dancer and actor, but his career had gone quiet. He was penniless. He was hungry for more than just food, he was homesick. For years, he had dreamed of spending Christmas with his family in Barbados. He could almost smell the salt air and feel the warmth of the sun on his skin. But he had no money for a boat ticket. In the middle of a global crisis, a trip across the ocean seemed like a fairy tale. When Neville told Abdullah he wanted to go to Barbados, the older man didn't offer him a loan. He didn't tell him to work harder. He didn't even offer a word of comfort. Instead, Abdullah looked him in the eye and said something that sounded like nonsense. "You are in Barbados." Neville tried to explain that he was actually sitting in a cold room in New York. Abdullah didn't want to hear it. He stood up, walked to the door, and slammed it shut. He told Neville that if he wanted to be in Barbados, he had to walk as if he were there, breathe as if he were there, and sleep as if he were there. He told him that the how was none of his business. For weeks Neville walked the icy streets of Manhattan, but in his mind he felt the crunch of tropical sand. When he went to bed in his tiny, freezing room, he imagined he was tucked into his bed back home in the islands. Then, the impossible happened. A brother he hadn't spoken to in years sent him a letter. Inside was a ticket for a ship and a bit of extra spending money. The letter said the family wanted him home for Christmas. Neville went to tell Abdullah the news, thinking the teacher would be surprised. Abdullah didn't even look up. He simply said, "How can you tell me you are going to Barbados when you are already there?" The ghost in the machine. Most of us live our lives waiting for the ship to come in. We wait for the right person to love us. We wait for the boss to give us a raise. We wait for the world to change so we can finally feel happy. We spend our days reacting to what is happening around us. If the bank account is low, we feel stressed. If a partner is grumpy, we feel lonely. If the news is bad, we feel afraid. This is what it means to be a vibrational victim. When you are in this state, it feels like life is something that happens to you. You feel like a small boat being tossed around by a giant ocean. You try to think positive thoughts, but they feel like a thin coat of paint over a crumbling wall. You might have watched movies or read books that told you to just believe, but when the bills arrived the next day, that belief vanished. The reason most people fail to change their lives isn't a lack of will. It isn't because they aren't lucky. It is because they are trying to change the reflection in the mirror without changing the person standing in front of it. They are trying to fix the outside world while their inside world is still stuck in a loop of not enough. The architect of reality. There is another way to live. It is the way Abdullah taught Neville. It is the way the most successful people in history have operated, whether they called it the law or just a hunch. This is the state of the architect of reality. An architect understands that life does not happen to you. It happens from you. You are not a victim of your surroundings. You are the one broadcasting the signal that creates those surroundings. Think of yourself like a radio tower. If you are broadcasting scarcity and worry, you cannot tune into a station that plays abundance and peace. You have to change your frequency first. This book is not about wishing for a better life. Wishing is what people do when they don't think they have any power. This book is about commanding. It is about using specific daily rituals to shift your internal set point. By the time you finish these pages, you will not be the same person who picked this book up. You will know how to stop the inner critic from ruining your progress. Use your emotions as a steering wheel rather than letting them drive you off a cliff. Create inspired action that feels easy rather than a hustle that burns you out. Recognize the signs that the universe is moving things around to help you. You will move from a life of just enough to a life of overflow. A story you might recognize. In a small studio apartment in Seattle, Sarah Jenkins sat at a cluttered desk. The room was dark, except for the glow of her laptop screen and the flickering street lamp outside. It was raining, a cold, steady drizzle that seemed to match the mood in her chest. Sarah was 34. She was a talented graphic designer, but her business was barely breathing. She spent her days doom scrolling through social media, watching other designers land big contracts and go on fancy vacations. Meanwhile, she was staring at a final notice from her internet provider. She had a rescue cat named Ink, who was currently curled up on a pile of laundry. Ink was the only thing that didn't make her feel like a failure. Sarah had tried the positive thinking thing before. She had a dream board hidden in the back of her closet, covered in pictures of a bright office, a loyal partner, and a trip to Italy. But looking at it only made her feel worse. It felt like a reminder of everything she didn't have. Good things happen to people with connections, she whispered to the empty room. People like me just have to work twice as hard for half the result. She felt a heavy, hollow sensation in her stomach. It was the feeling of being stuck. She was highly intuitive. She often knew who was calling before she picked up the phone, but she ignored her gut because her brain was too busy worrying about rent. She was a classic vibrational victim, though she didn't know the name for it yet. She was waiting for a miracle, but she was broadcasting a signal of stay away. Sarah's story is the story of so many of us. It is the story of having big dreams, but a small reality. Over the course of this book, we are going to follow Sarah as she dusts off that dream board and learns how to actually use it. We are going to watch her move from a cramped studio to a life of her own design. Why this works? You might be wondering if this is just more magic that won't work in the real world. But this isn't magic. It is the way energy works. Throughout these chapters, we will look at the lives of people who shaped our world. We will look at Nikola Tesla, who understood that the entire universe is made of energy, frequency, and vibration. He didn't just build machines, he built them in his mind until they were so real he could see them spinning. We will look at Madam C.J. Walker, who went from a penniless washerwoman earning pennies a day to the first female self-made millionaire in America. She didn't have connections or luck. She had a vision that came to her in a dream, and she had the vibrational stamina to make it real. We will look at the science of the human heart, which has an electromagnetic field much stronger than the brain. When you learn to tune that field, like a tuning fork, the world around you has no choice but to ring in harmony with you. The roadmap ahead. This workbook is designed to be your guide through a total internal makeover. We aren't going to just talk about theories, we are going to get our hands dirty. The assessment, we will start by looking into the mirror. You will learn to do a reality audit to see exactly where your energy is leaking. The physics of feeling. We will dive into the 369 method and the power of resonance. You will learn why seeing it isn't enough, you have to feel it in your bones. Breaking the wall. We will identify the invisible wall of resistance. You will find out why your brain tries to keep you stuck and how to trick it into letting you grow. The script. You will learn the art of scripting, writing your life story in a way that forces the universe to act it out. The void. We will talk about that scary middle part where you've done the work but the results haven't shown up yet. You will learn how to stay in the state of certainty when your bank account says otherwise. The arrival. Finally, you will learn how to handle the yes when it finally comes. The journey from being a victim to being an architect is the most important trip you will ever take. It is the journey from the cold streets of what is to the warm sun of what can be. Sarah is currently sitting in her rainy apartment, staring at her bills. She doesn't know that her life is about to change. She doesn't know that the final notice on her desk is the last one she will ever see. But you know. Because you are holding the map. Walk as if you are already there. Breathe as if it has already happened. The door is closed and the session has begun. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Does your reality match your desires? I think that yesterday was a crisis in my life. I finished the first part of Renouvelier's second essays, and see no reason why his definition of free will, the sustaining of a thought because I choose to when I might have other thoughts, need be the definition of an illusion. My first act of free will shall be to believe in free will. William James sat in a dimly lit room at Harvard in 1870. The air smelled of old paper and the cold, damp Boston winter. At 28 years old, he was a man who should have felt like the world was at his feet. He had a medical degree. He had a brilliant mind. He lived in a house full of books. But as he stared at his journal, he felt like a prisoner. For years, James had been drowning in a deep, dark sadness. He felt like a machine made of meat and bone. He believed that his thoughts were just the result of his brain cells firing, and that he had no real say in how he felt. If his brain was sad, he was sad. If his life was gray, it was because the world was gray. He felt like a leaf being pushed around by a strong wind, with no power to change his direction. He was what we might call a victim of his own biology. He looked at the world around him and saw only limits. He saw his failing health, his lack of energy, and his heavy heart. He believed his reality was the boss of him. But on that April day, he decided to try something radical. He decided to play a game. He would spend one whole year acting as if he actually had the power to choose his thoughts. He didn't know if it was true. He didn't have proof. But he realized that staying where he was would surely lead to his end. He decided that for 12 months, he would be the architect of his own mind. This one small shift changed everything. William James went on to become the father of American psychology. He didn't wait for his depression to lift before he started acting like a man who could choose his life. He chose the thought first, and the reality followed. He discovered that the world is not a fixed, solid wall. It is more like a mirror. The mirror principle. If you stand in front of a mirror and notice a smudge of dirt on your forehead, what do? You don't take a rag and start scrubbing the glass. You know that wouldn't work. The mirror is just showing you what is already there. To get rid of the smudge, you have to wash your own face. Most of us spend our entire lives trying to scrub the mirror. We try to change our bank accounts by working 3 jobs we hate. We try to find love by begging people to like us. We try to feel happy by buying things we don't need. We are looking at the reflection and screaming at it to change, while we stay exactly the same. The mirror principle says that your outer world, the money in your pocket, the people in your house, the way your body feels, is a direct reflection of your inner state. It is a feedback loop. If you feel like a victim inside, the world will give you plenty of things to be a victim of. If you feel like there is never enough, you will constantly run into not enough situations. This isn't a fairy tale. It is a way of understanding how our brains work. We are constantly filtering the world. There are millions of bits of information hitting your eyes and ears every second. Your brain cannot process all of them. It has to choose what to show you. Think about the last time you decided you wanted to buy a specific car. Maybe it was a red truck. Suddenly, you started seeing red trucks everywhere. They were on the highway, in the grocery store parking lot, and in your neighbor's driveway. Did everyone in town go out and buy a red truck on the same day? No. Those trucks were always there. You just didn't see them, because your brain didn't think they were important. Once you gave your brain the red truck command, it started pointing them out to you. Your internal focus changed what you noticed in the external world. This is called the frequency illusion. When we talk about the law of attraction, we are talking about this filter. If your internal state is set to struggle, your brain will look for every possible reason to struggle. It will ignore the opportunities and focus on the bills. To change the reflection, you have to change the person standing in front of the glass. The reality audit. Before you can change the reflection, you have to be very honest about what the mirror is showing you right now. You can't fix a leak in a boat if you refuse to admit there is water at your feet. Sarah Jenkins sat on a peeling green park bench in Seattle. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where the sky looks like a wet wool blanket. She had her workbook open on her lap, but she was mostly watching a pigeon fight over a soggy piece of bread. Sarah was 34 and felt like she was running a race on a treadmill. She was a freelance graphic designer, which sounded fancy to her parents, but mostly meant she spent a lot of time doom scrolling and worrying about her rent. Her apartment was small, her cat was grumpy, and her bank account was always hovering just above zero. She had heard about manifestation before. She had seen the videos of people talking about their dream lives and their fancy cars. Every time she saw them, she felt a sharp poke of annoyance in her chest. Must be nice, she would think. But that's for people with rich parents or a lot of luck. I have to work twice as hard just to get half as far. She looked down at the page in her lap. It asked her to perform a reality audit. This wasn't about wishing or hoping. It was a cold, hard look at her current numbers. The workbook asked her to score 4 areas of her life from 1 to 10. Money, are you in a state of flow or a state of friction? Love, do your relationships fill you up or drain you dry? Health, do you have the energy to pursue your dreams? Purpose, does your work feel like a calling or a chore? Sarah picked up her pen. Her hand shook a little. For money, she wrote a 3. She had enough for rent, but she lived in fear of a flat tire or a broken laptop. For love, she wrote a 2. She was lonely, and the few dates she went on felt like job interviews that went poorly. For health, she wrote a 5. She was okay, but she felt tired all the time. For purpose, she wrote a 4. She liked art, but her clients always wanted her to make things look boring and corporate. As she looked at those numbers, she felt a wave of shame. But then she remembered the story of the mirror. If her reality was a reflection, then these low numbers weren't just bad luck. They were a map of her internal world. She looked at her top 3 emotions from the last week. She wrote down anxiety, resentment, and boredom. She realized that her internal world was gray. And looking around at the gray sky, the gray sidewalk, and her gray bank account, she saw the match. For the first time, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like an observer. If she was the one holding the gray paint, she was also the one who could pick up a different color. The power of expectation. The way we see the world doesn't just change what we notice. It actually changes how other people behave around us. In the 1960s, a group of researchers did a famous study in an elementary school. They told the teachers that certain students in their classes were academic spurters. They told the teachers that these specific kids had taken a special test and were about to have a huge burst of intelligence and growth. The truth was, there was no special test. The names of the spurters were chosen completely at random from a hat. Those kids were no different than any other kids in the school. But something amazing happened. At the end of the year, those spurter kids actually did better. Their IQ scores went up. They learned faster. Why? Because the teachers expected them to be smart. Because the teachers believed these kids were special, they treated them differently. They gave them more time to answer questions. They smiled at them more. They gave them harder work because they believed the kids could handle it. The teacher's internal belief created a new reality for the students. This is known as the Pygmalion effect. This happens in your life every single day. If you walk into a room expecting people to be mean to you, you will act guarded. You might not smile. You might have your arms crossed. People will see your cold behavior and react by being cold back to you. Then you will go home and say, "See? I knew people were mean." The mirror reflected your expectation. You proved yourself right, but you were the one who started the chain reaction. Neville Goddard, a man who spent his life teaching people how to use their minds, called this the law of assumption. He believed that if you assume a feeling is true, your world has no choice but to build itself around that feeling. He didn't want people to just think about what they wanted. He wanted them to feel what it would be like if they already had it. He once taught a woman who had a boss that was incredibly mean. The boss yelled at her and made her life miserable. Neville didn't tell her to quit or to yell back. He told her to revise her day. Every night before she went to sleep, he told her to imagine the boss being kind and praising her work. He told her to feel the relief and the joy of having a great boss. Within weeks, the boss's behavior changed. He started being polite. Then he got a promotion and moved to a different office, and the woman was given his old job. The mirror of her life changed because she stopped fighting the reflection and started changing the person in front of it. Identifying the gap. The hardest part of the reality audit is facing the gap. The gap is the distance between where you are and where you want to be. Most people look at the gap and feel despair. They think, I'm at a 2 in money and I want to be a 10. That's too far. It will take forever. I don't have the tools. But the gap is actually where the magic happens. The gap is your work order. It tells you exactly where your internal frequency is out of tune. If you are at a 2 in money, it means your internal money thermostat is set to scarcity. You are probably thinking about what things cost before you think about how much you like them. You are probably worried about bills the moment you wake up. You are probably holding onto your money with tight, nervous hands. To move from a 2 to a 10, you don't start by finding $1 million. You start by finding the feeling of a 10. What does a person with a 10 in money feel like? They feel secure. They feel generous. They feel like the world is a place of plenty. They don't panic when they spend $5 on a coffee because they know more is coming. You can't always change your bank balance overnight, but you can change your money feeling in an instant. You can choose to feel grateful for the $5 you do have. You can choose to notice the abundance of air in your lungs or the sunlight on the grass. These are small things, but they shift your internal frequency. When you shift your frequency, you start to notice the red trucks. You notice the job posting you would have skipped. You notice the person at the coffee shop who happens to need exactly the skills you have. You notice the idea for a new business that has been sitting in the back of your mind for years. The first step of the architect. Being an architect of reality means you stop being a vibrational victim. A victim says, I'll be happy when I get the money. An architect says, I'll get the money because I've decided to be the kind of person who is happy and productive. This requires a type of bravery that most people don't have. It requires you to look at a final notice on a bill and still choose to feel like a person who is provided for. It requires you to look at a lonely apartment and still choose to feel like a person who is loved. It sounds like lying to yourself, but it's actually the opposite. It's telling the truth about your power. The final notice is just a piece of paper. It is a reflection of your past thoughts. It is old news. Your current feeling is what creates your future news. William James, the man who decided to believe in free will, didn't get better the very next day. He still had moments of darkness. But he kept sustaining the thought. He kept choosing to believe he was the author of his story. By the time his year-long experiment was over, he wasn't just a man who felt better. He was a man who had built a brand new life. He realized that the greatest discovery of his time wasn't a new machine or a new medicine. It was the fact that humans can change their lives by changing their minds. As Sarah Jenkins sat on that park bench, she looked at her low scores one more time. She didn't feel like crying anymore. She felt like a scientist. She realized that for years, she had been a thermometer. She was just reporting the temperature of the room. If it was cold, she felt cold. If it was gray, she felt gray. She decided right then that she wanted to be a thermostat instead. A thermostat doesn't just report the temperature, it sets it. It decides how warm the room is going to be, and then the heaters kick on to match that setting. She stood up, brushed the crumbs off her lap, and started walking home. She noticed that she was walking a little taller. She wasn't looking at the cracks in the sidewalk. She was looking at the tops of the buildings. She wasn't rich yet, and she wasn't in love yet, but she felt a tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like she was finally holding the pen. The world is waiting for you to decide who you are. It doesn't have an opinion. It doesn't want you to fail, and it doesn't want you to succeed. It is simply a mirror, standing still, waiting for you to move. If you want the world to smile at you, you have to smile first. This is not a matter of positive thinking. It is a matter of precision. Just like a carpenter uses a level to make sure a wall is straight, you must use your awareness to make sure your internal state matches the life you want to build. If a carpenter's level is off by just 1 inch at the foundation, the roof of the house will be off by a foot. Most people wonder why their roof is crooked when they never check their foundation. This reality audit is your level. It tells you where you are starting, so you can decide where you are going. We often think that the stars are just lights in the sky, far away and disconnected from us. But for thousands of years, sailors used those distant lights to find their way across dark, dangerous oceans. They didn't have GPS. They didn't have maps of the water. They only had their relationship with the light above them. Your desires are like those stars. They aren't just wishes. They are navigation points. They are there to tell you which way to steer your ship. But to get to the destination, you have to be the one at the wheel. You have to believe that the ship will go where you tell it to, even when the waves are high and the shore is nowhere in sight. Chapter 2: Tuning Your Internal Frequency. The walls of the laboratory began to groan. It wasn't the sound of wind or the heavy city traffic outside on East Houston Street. It was a deep, bone-shaking hum that seemed to come from the very earth beneath Manhattan. Inside the building, heavy machinery began to dance across the floor. Glass beakers shattered. Plaster fell from the ceiling like snow. Outside, the neighbors panicked, certain an earthquake was about to swallow the city. Nikola Tesla, the tall, thin inventor with the piercing eyes, didn't panic. He knew exactly what was happening. He grabbed a sledgehammer. With one heavy swing, he smashed a small, vibrating metal box he had attached to the center of the building. The shaking stopped instantly. The world went quiet. When the police rushed in minutes later, Tesla was calm. He told them the party was over. He had just proven that a device no bigger than an alarm clock could, if tuned to the right frequency, bring down the tallest skyscraper in New York. The secret music of the world. That day in 1898 changed how we understand the world. Tesla wasn't a magician, he was a master of energy. He understood a secret that most of us forget by the time we leave the 3rd grade: everything is moving. Nothing is truly still. Your desk, your coffee mug, your shoes, and even your own body are made of tiny particles that are constantly wiggling. In science, we call this mechanical resonance. Every object has a home note, a specific speed at which it likes to vibrate. If you find that note and play it back to the object, you can make it move, shake, or even break. This is why a singer can shatter a wine glass with just their voice. They aren't just loud, they have found the home note of the glass and matched it perfectly. Tesla spent his life obsessed with these invisible waves. He didn't just look at machines, he looked at the whole universe as a giant ocean of energy. He believed that if you wanted to change your life, you couldn't just move things around on the outside. You had to change the speed at which you were wiggling on the inside. He famously said that to understand the universe, you have to think about 3 things: energy, frequency, and vibration. This is where most people get stuck with the law of attraction. They think it's about wishing for things. They treat the universe like a giant catalog where they can just order a new car or a better job. But the universe doesn't speak English, and it doesn't care about your wish list. The universe speaks the language of frequency. It is like a giant radio. If you want to hear the music on 102.7 FM, you have to turn your dial to 102.7. You can't stay on 95.5 and get mad that the music is wrong. You have to match the station. The human tuning fork. Imagine you are standing in a room full of tuning forks. Each one